thinking about it. She'd go down to the border and give a speech about how, as a prosecutor, she learned how to get on top of crime and wouldn't allow a single criminal, whether they're human traffickers or cartels or coming from other countries. Not one criminal is going to cross this border if I'm president. I mean, she can change the tone of this thing with that one credential in a way that nobody else could.
All right, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, Bloomberg Politics contributors, thank you so much for joining us as we try to parse through exactly how this race has been upended in the last 24 hours and what all of this means. Certainly, financial markets are trying to get their heads around that as well. So let's get a check on those now. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle is with us from New York. So, Abigail, we've talked a lot about the Trump trade. Is there a Harris trade out there?
I don't know that there's a Harris trade yet because we don't know exactly what her policies would be. We can imagine that they would be similar to that of the current administration. But what's really standing out to me is you and Joe are breaking these headlines about influential Democrats, most notably recently and moments ago, actually, former House Speaker Pelosi endorsing VP Kamala Harris, the idea that perhaps we will have Minority Leader Jeffries follow and then Senator Chuck Schumer follow as well. We don't know if those other two, but as Jeannie and Rick were talking about, the odds seem increasing that Kamala Harris will in fact be the party's nominee. Markets that are at session high. So markets like this certainty, the S&P 500 up 1%, the Dow, which earlier had been lower, now up about 0.2%. That NASDAQ 100, which had been down 2 weeks in a row, the first time in many, many weeks, up 1.5%. Now let's break this down through the VIX, because the VIX is an actual measure of uncertainty or certainty. And what I'd really like to point out here is as that headline crossed about former House Speaker Pelosi endorsing VP Harris, the VIX went back below 15. Now, what makes this so interesting in the bottom panel, what we're looking at is the VIX itself, again, a measure of uncertainty. As the uncertainty increased last week around President Biden's fate, it increased to 17, the highest level we had seen it in quite a few months. The VIX curve itself increased. That's a fancy way of saying that investors were uncertain. Now it's all cooling off. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, because it was always also cooling off after Donald Trump's the assassination attempt, as investors thought that there was more certainty that way. But when we peel back beneath the surface, the Trump trade, we may not have a Harris trade to look at this moment, but the Trump trade is cooling off. We have big tech hire. Alphabet and Tesla are both up ahead of earnings tomorrow. Tesla, on the one hand, because of CEO Elon Musk's ardent support of Donald Trump, maybe that's a little bit of a Trump trade. The true Trump trade, DJT, Trump Media and Entertainment, well, it's down about 2.1%. And then very interesting, Halliburton, the drilling company, is also off 2%. And drilling and energy, of course, to the upside, the idea that more drilling could happen under a Trump administration. Well, today that idea is cooling off. But the one thing I would say over the last 6 weeks or 6 days or since the debate, anything is possible. Stay tuned. We'll see if that...
Thank you so much. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle watching the markets for us as we cover politics here in Washington on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons. With great questions now, Kaylee, assuming this is the case, and boy, it sure seems like it today. Kamala Harris has no challengers. She has the bulk of the Democratic Party behind her, with a couple of key exceptions. We're waiting to hear from the Obamas, for instance, and Chuck Schumer, but remarkable number of endorsements just today alone, including state delegations. So the question becomes the messaging that she will pose against Donald Trump, the narrative that she could turn on the age issue, but also on the race issue, with Donald Trump showing in polls that he's been attracting many young black voters, black men, for instance, away from Joe Biden, which has been confounding for the Biden campaign. And you wonder if it stops that narrative dead in its tracks.
Well, this is something I actually asked a pollster for the what was the Biden-Harris campaign, Celinda Lake, about last night, whether or not Kamala Harris is the candidate who can bring back some of that coalition, young voters, voters of color, back into the Democratic Party where they had strayed away. And this was her response.
She is exactly the person to bring that coalition together. And it's not just bringing it together, which is a very good question. It's also energizing it. A lot of young people and people of color are thinking, I can stay home on the couch here. I don't have to go to the polls. So energize them, unite them, and energize and unite our side, litigate the case, make a strong case for our accomplishments. She's a great candidate at just the right moment.
Let's add the voice now of Glinda Carr, President, CEO, and co-founder of Higher Heights for America. Glinda, it's great to have you with us today on Bloomberg TV and radio. What is your thought on this?
I mean, this is a pivotal election cycle. We said this before yesterday. And so I think I would say that we're in her first full day as candidate for President Kamala Harris. And so we can have multiple feelings, right? I think people know the direction of where the Democrats are going. We can obviously thank Joe Biden for his service and mourn the loss of his suspension, right? We also can celebrate. Higher Heights is the political home for Black women. We help Black women to vote, run, win, and lead. And over the last 24 hours, it's an opportunity to be excited about the historic nature of a Kamala Harris presidency. But also, we know that as we celebrate, we're going to prepare to support, defend, mobilize, and organize.
Well, Glinda, I'm glad you point out the historic nature of this. Obviously, the United States of America has never had a woman as president, let alone a woman of color. Are you convinced the country is ready for it now?
I need America to believe in the possibilities of a Kamala Harris presidency, not just because it's a historic, because she sits at the intersection of race and gender, but here is a woman who has run and won and governed on every level of government. She was a local elected official. She was a statewide executive as Attorney General for California. She was a federal elected leader in the U.S. Senate and now is governing as vice president. She is duly qualified for this moment. But listening to my colleague Celinda Lake, I believe that, her multiple identities is her superpower. In this moment of a divided country, I believe her candidacy and the way she will organize her campaign will build a coalition of voters looking to move this country to higher heights in a moment where we're concerned about rolling back the very rights that my grandmother and mother have fought for on women's rights, human rights, voting rights, and on reproductive rights.
There could be more endorsements coming in the next couple of hours here as CNN reports essentially what we were just talking about here. Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries to endorse Harris as soon as today, unlocked potentially by Nancy Pelosi's endorsement that will likely lead the way to more. Glinda, I'm taken by the language, the rhetoric we're already hearing in this campaign, and I know that this is nothing new for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump specifically mispronounces her name on purpose, and his campaign is now referring to her. This is from the co-manager of the campaign, not even Donald Trump himself, referring to her as Laughin' Kamala. We heard Cacklin' Kamala coming from Donald Trump on the podium. These tropes, does she acknowledge them or move on?
I think that's the work of organizations like Higher Heights on two fronts, calling out the racism and sexism in this moment, but also the mis and disinformation that has swirled around Kamala Harris. Particularly, there is a portion of this country that has created a politically toxic and racially divisive times. I think most Americans want an election where we are fighting and debating on values, on policies, and on the direction of this country. And I think you're going to see a growing course of not only just Black women, but Americans who are going to call out Trump and his supporters on creating unnecessary, negative attack on Vice President Harris.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Glinda, as you talk about the values of this group of voters in particular, what we've been talking about for this entire election cycle is how ultimately the outcome could be just about turnout, about whether voters in key swing states actually show up and cast a vote. What are the values, what are the issues that drive turnout this cycle for this group?
Voters are concerned about the direction of this country, first and foremost. People are ready for a new direction in this country. As it relates to the work of Higher Heights, organizing Black women, Black women, when they're fired up, which given what we've seen over the last 24 hours, Black women do not organize themselves to the polls. They also bring their house, their block, their church, their sorority, and their union. I believe that a Kamala Harris presidency will also ignite the possibilities of leadership of young voters and a coalition of voters that come from different parts of this country, social economic backgrounds that have a common goal about making sure that we are creating economically thriving, educated, healthy, and safe community for all Americans. And in this moment, I believe in the possibilities of Black women leading America. We need to have direct conversations with those that we live with and our neighbors about the direction of this country and what the work will need to be done to ensure that we are having a free, fair election where voters can vote for the candidate they believe is best suited in this moment.
Will her record as a prosecutor hurt or help her with the Black community and with the electorate at large?
I think it's important to say the first thing that Vice President Harris said yesterday in her statement was she wants to earn the vote of Americans. And that is her work, to talk about her record, which is broad. Again, I said this is a woman who has run, won, and governed on all levels of government. And she's going to make the case that her portfolio of work, her portfolio of accomplishments, and her vision for this country will create a value-based case of how she's going to earn the votes of Americans across this country.
Glenda, obviously we focused pretty much all of our conversation today on Kamala Harris being a presidential candidate, but I know at Higher Heights you're focused on elevating Black women in all areas of government. What do you expect the trickle-down effect of her candidacy, or potentially we could be talking about her presidency one day, will have for others to follow her?
The late Shirley Chisholm, the first Black woman to serve in Congress, once said, "I have faith in America." I certainly believe that my fellow Americans have wavered in that in the last couple of years, given the turmoil of our democracy. Kamala Harris's candidacy will energize not only Black voters and Black women, but a coalition of voters that will create a wave to elect a very diverse group of candidates that are running across this country, including her ability to support electing 2 Black women to the U.S. Senate. Currently, there have only been 2 Black women elected and serving in the United States House of Representatives in 1992, Carol Moseley Braun being the first Black woman to serve. And it almost took 20 years to have the second, which was Kamala Harris in 2016. We currently have LaFonza Butler from California serving. She was appointed earlier this year. We've never had a Black woman, 2 Black women serving at the same time, and we have 2 candidates, current Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware, and Prince George's executive Angela Alsobrooks in Maryland running. And they're both 2 competitive races that have an opportunity to catapult 2 Black women to the U.S. Senate at the same time.
Well, Glenda, we're glad you could join us today. Glenda Carr of Higher Heights for America PAC, thank you for the insights and what is clearly the best backdrop we're going to get all day here on Bloomberg TV. It's great to have you as part of our conversation. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons with a lot of questions, but many of them answered during the time of this broadcast, Kaylee, and maybe later on today. We're waiting on Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer. The Obamas, I guess, may be a little bit different. They're not actually office holders here in Washington, but these are the endorsements that will close the deal.
Yeah, now that Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi has come out with a full-throated endorsement for Kamala Harris, the question is, did we just have an open convention, if you will, but it only lasted for the last 24 hours since It's been almost exactly that amount of time since Joe Biden exited this race.
Isn't that true? We'll bring in two more voices covering this story. The best of Bloomberg, Julie Fine, our Texas bureau chief, and Gregory Cordy helping to cover politics here in Washington. Great to have both of you with us. Gregory, what are you hearing? Or do we get the likes of Schumer and Jeffries before this day is out? Could this all be done today?
You really get the sense that this is snowballing, right? That the endorsements are coming in by the minute and the hour. We're also hearing state delegations weighing in. Last I looked, when I walked into the studio here, 900 or 750 of the 1,976 pledged delegates that Kamala Harris needs had already pledged to her. So by the end of the day, maybe tomorrow, we can start calling her presumptive nominee. Amazing. You really get the sense that the party's rallying around her. There was a little bit of I think a moment where the party had to make a decision. Do we rally around Kamala Harris, or do we have an open process at the convention to let other voices? I think that time's passed.
That seems to have been answered.
If any other candidate, credible candidate, was going to emerge, they needed to emerge in the first 12 hours. That's passed. We're now coming up on the 24-hour mark since President Biden said he would no longer run again. This is very quickly rallying around Kamala Harris as the party's nominee.
Well, of course, it's not just about endorsements. It's also about donations. Julie, we knew that Act Blue raised some $50 million from Democratic donors, or those are the figures that Act Blue reported in the 7 hours after Kamala Harris announced that she did intend to compete for the Democratic nomination. Now, Politico reporting this hour that a super PAC linked to Biden, Future Forward, received 150 million new commitments from Democratic donors after he announced he would step aside from the race. What is the money telling us here?
Well, the money's telling you you're going to get more money. Once you see donors hopping on, then ones that were hesitant or ones who are waiting, donors saying, is it going to be Bashir? Is it going to be this person? Is it going to be that person? It's likely going to be Kamala Harris. So now you've got donors that are all moving in the same direction, which is really helpful for the Democratic Party. So I think the fact that the vice president really solidified her support so quickly, you just heard Gregory talking about delegates. Texas has more than 270 delegates, 273. This is a state. They're meeting tonight, and they're going to decide their path forward. So by the time they meet, they're going to see all this money going in her direction and all these delegates going in her direction. So this is very good news for a Democratic Party that was seeing some of their donors dry up.
Julie, how much of a concern should it be for Democrats to appear that like this is a coronation? Donald Trump is already calling them out for stealing, quote unquote, I'll give you air quotes on camera here, the election from Joe Biden. The lack of a contest for people who haven't been paying a lot of attention means what?
Well, I think it's going to be frustrating for some people. I spoke to an independent yesterday who said, can't we just have a minute here to try to see what happens? But at the end of the day, I think, like many others, they're going to fall in line or they're going to stay home. Most likely, a lot of voters that lean Democrat, if they're frustrated with the process, likely will fall in line and when they look at their options of what to do.
Well, on the subject of options, Gregory, if we're thinking it could be a matter of hours or days before Kamala Harris becomes the presumptive presidential nominee, when are we going to find out about the vice presidential nominee?
That's obviously one of the first big decisions that she has to make. And it's really, for all the talk about what a running mate brings to the ticket, what it brings to the ticket is really an insight into the decision-making process of the person at the top of the ticket. So whether or not we get somebody who moderates the ticket by moving to the center, somebody who can nail down the progressive wing of the party, maybe geographical balance, gender or racial balance, whatever those criteria are that she's considering in this mix, that'll kind of give an insight of how she's going to govern. She has until the convention to make that decision. We saw Donald Trump wait until literally the moment of the roll call to say who he was going to ask his delegates to nominate as vice president. But she might have less time than that. We're still waiting on the party to decide whether or not they're going to nominate Kamala Harris at the convention, or whether they're going to do so in some kind of virtual roll call vote to meet some of these ballot deadlines that are still a little iffy. So this is something that she's got to turn her attention to pretty quickly if she's going to do all the vetting that you want to do of a vice presidential nominee.
All right, Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy and Julie Fine, thank you so much for joining us as we mark now 24 hours since the moment the world seemed to change. Joe Biden not seeking re-election. And of course, the endorsements for Kamala Harris have continued to pour in. Just this hour, we heard from Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi with her endorsement. And apparently we're about to hear from the House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, CNN reporting that he and Chuck Schumer could endorse as soon as today. And Hakeem Jeffries is set to hold a presser in just a few minutes at 2 p.m. Eastern, Joe.
Yes, indeed. We'll have ears on it for you here in Washington.
Indeed, and we'll continue our coverage of the political and economic outlook later on this evening. Joe and I will be back for the 5 p.m. edition of Balance of Power right here on Bloomberg TV and radio, so make sure to join us then. This is Bloomberg.
Jobs day like Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week for this Monday, July 22nd. And we have got a rally underway in technology and mega caps as investors get ready for kind of a big week when it comes to earnings in that group. So we've got Tesla and Alphabet both reporting.
Yeah, we're also going to continue to digest the news of President Biden bowing out of the November race. That is certainly top of mind. We'll have coverage on that throughout the hour. And so coming up, Carol, we're going to start with what policies under a President Harris would look like versus under a President Trump.
I do feel like today is a moment to kind of take a breath, take a pause, and just kind of figure out where we go politically, because there's still a few months to go until we actually place our ballots and place our votes, if you will. Having said that, we're also going to, though, talk a little bit about the Trump trade. We talked about that over the past week or so, the Harris trade, the election trade overall, what that November outcome really, really means for the financial markets and for investing.
Oh, plus, you got to follow the money and just see where the money has gone, especially over the last 24 hours. The cash race is certainly on. When it comes to the campaign, we're going to get a tally a bit later in the program.
All right, lots to come certainly over the next 60 minutes and then some. First up, though, let's get you caught up to date when it comes to the trade on this Monday. Let's turn things over to Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. We have got stocks advancing back to work Monday. Significant change in tone from last week. A couple of big round numbers here with NASDAQ back above 18,000 as of now. The Dow at 40,402 as of now, advancing by 0.3% on the Dow. S&P up 58 to 55.62, a gain right now of 1%. NASDAQ up 1.6%. The NASDAQ 100 index up 1.5%, while the Russell 2000 is up now by 1%. 10-year 4.25%, with a 2-year right now 4.52%. Gold down 0.3%, 23.93 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude trading back below $80 a barrel today, down by just about 0.3%, lower by 24 cents a barrel, 79.89 on WTI. Bottom line here, stocks are rebounding after their worst week since April as investors look beyond Joe Biden ending his re-election campaign to focus on the start of the tech earnings season. Case in point, Alphabet and Tesla both report tomorrow. In the meantime, keeping an eye on Mattel shares, the toy maker surging after Reuters reported that private equity firm L. Catterton has approached the toy maker with an acquisition offer, citing sources. Right now, we've got Mattel surging by 16.2%, Hasbro up by 1.8%. So again, recapping, stocks higher. S&P right now up 1.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. While we do not want to get ahead of ourselves, to be fair, it is smart to be researching what a Kamala White House might be like and to be thinking about the policies that could impact every aspect of our world based on the outcome of that U.S. presidential race. On that race, the vice president now likely, it seems like there's a lot of
I think it's fair to say likely. I think it's fair to say. It's becoming more and more likely, whoever endorses her next, right?
Yeah, we're talking about Kamala Harris, expected to be the Democratic presidential candidate. We're not quite there, but it does look like it's pointing in that direction. Earlier today at a White House event, staying mum about it all, except when it comes to President Biden.
And I am firsthand witness that every day our President Joe Biden fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
That's Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today from the White House. Many sectors, from banks to EVs to big tech firms, likely will face a status quo policy environment under Vice President Kamala Harris if she were to win the presidential election in November. So writes Bloomberg's Nathan Dean. He's Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Government Analyst, and he joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Nathan, good to see you this afternoon. So the first question is, what might a Kamala Harris White House and administration mean when it comes to policies and changes from what we saw or are seeing with a Biden administration, a Biden White House?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We're telling clients this election was really about three things. The first is tariffs, second is taxes, and the third is the sector impacts. Now, when it comes to tariffs, you have this binary choice between President Trump, who has said 60% tariffs on items from China, but Kamala Harris, as a senator, was somewhat skeptical of the Canadian-U.S.-Mexico agreement and also the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and largely due to climate change concerns. So there's a little bit of difference between her and Biden on tariffs. When it comes to taxes,